But first, before we go any further, this. Oh, look at that. If you're watching in vision, you will see that right behind me has flashed up. I've got to hold back the tears here. I'm feeling patriotism come through I'm sweating patriotism. And it's red, white and blue sweat as well. What about that? There it is. This, of course, is the story of the Culture Secretary, who's criticised the BBC for the sneering attitude after its breakfast television presenters appeared to mock Robert Jenrick for displaying the Union flag in his office. Charlie State and Naga Manchetta laughed as they pointed out the large flags have begun appearing regularly in the backgrounds of ministerial interviews. Let's have a look and a listen to what happened.
Robert Jenrick, thank you. I think your flag is not up to standard size government interview measurements. I think it's just a little bit small, but that's your department, really. It's just a thought.
The picture of the Queen.
You'll be aware that every time we've seen it every day, haven't we? It's a stock.
Always a flag
thing, isn't it?
Always a flag. They had the picture of the Queen there as well, though, in the Westminster office, I'm assuming.
Manchetti later received a reminder from bosses about inappropriate social media use after she liked a tweet which praised their comments and said, and I quote, "The flag shaggers will be up in arms." It's a phrase I never thought I would say on the radio, but there you go. It's a lot of interesting things about this. I've sat on that sofa with Charlie and Naga probably about 30 times over the last few years. For various reasons. And these are two very skilled journalists, okay? Charlie used to work in Radio 2, which I didn't, not at Radio 2, in radio as well. And so we've got a shared history in places that we've worked at. They are supreme professionals. I've stood and sat in awe and watched them hold together a programme during breaking news programmes and all that goes with live telly. And they are probably two of the best at doing that kind of format on TV. Both great journalists, and that shouldn't be in question. From a broadcast, I'm trying to work out from a broadcaster's perspective what went wrong here, because I know there's many of you thinking, well, does it matter? They just had a joke about the fact that he's got an oversized flag, and so Charlie State says, well, look, your flag, I think you need a bigger flag, mate. Now that bit kind of could be all right, but then it starts to get into the giggling and oh yeah, you've got to have your picture of the Queen, haven't you? Right, it's the head of state, and it's a Secretary of State's office. Shock, horror, they have a Union flag and a picture of the head of state in the office of a Secretary of State. We'd be kind of wondering if they weren't there, if that was the case. So the whole thing doesn't look good, because there is a sort of sneering attitude, I think, around this. And I noticed that there's been a lot of as you would imagine, social media commentary around this. And I spotted a tweet from Sir Robbie Gibb, who is the former Director of Communications at Downing Street and also a former BBC man. And he said this, and it was completely reasonable. He said, on the day that the BBC announces the welcome news that it's moving more programmes out of London, this BBC breakfast clip reveals a sneering and cynical attitude towards our monarchy and a flag that shows it's not just about where people are based. The BBC has a wider cultural problem. He is spot on. Let's speak with Calvin Robinson, who, of course, Calvin, as you will know, is a Conservative commentator, a regular here on Talk Radio. Calvin, what did you make of this? Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon. Well, first of all, I agree with the Culture Secretary in that this moved from banter, which is perfectly acceptable, into sneering, which is not. I think it's another case of the BBC forgetting what the first B in their name stands for. Unfortunately, there's a lot of anti-British sentiment over at the BBC. I'm not sure why. Why is patriotism a bad thing, Ian?
Well, indeed. No, I'm absolutely with you on that. And it was that point, wasn't it, when I think, as I said a second ago, I think Charlie was trying to make a joke about the size of the flag, and that may or may not have been appropriate. But then it kind of went into the giggling and the, not just the flag, they got the Queen there as well, as if there was something funny and weird about that.
Well, that's the thing. So for me, the flag isn't really used as a symbol in this country. It's much more of an American thing. We have become quite Americanized in having flags in the background that, take it or leave it. I don't mind it, but we have our sovereign, and we should have a portrait of Her Majesty the Queen in the offices, as you rightly said, of Secretaries of State. That is quite appropriate. It should be there. But to make a big deal out of it and to look down their noses at it as if it's some kind of strange thing is bizarre to me. And I also feel like if it was an EU flag, they wouldn't have batted an eyelid. It is very much an anti-British sentiment.
Yeah,
it's not an anti-flag sentiment.
I did wonder that. I kept thinking about whether, if it would have been a different thing. I can't imagine they would have had a giggle at the EU flag, because they'd have thought that might make them xenophobic or something.
Exactly. Why is it specifically our flag that we're turning our noses up at? And it is this metropolitan liberal elite. It is this London class of the wokists. And as Sir Robbie Gibb pointed out, all we're doing now, all the BBC is doing now, is importing the London wokists up to Manchester in a case of diversity. They're not actually making themselves more diverse. They're just moving the woke mob around. It's ridiculous. Yeah. But this snobbery has to go.
Do you think it's, lots of people have said this is typical BBC. And the BBC is a huge organisation, Calvin. How do you read those kind of comments when people say this is very much what we expect from the BBC? They've been in the firing line for lots of things recently. And of course, everything from the licence fee to the kind of programmes they put out is regularly and correctly under scrutiny. Is this a very BBC thing to do, the sneering?
Unfortunately so. They have become very anti-British in their stance. We saw that throughout the entirety of Brexit. They were very much in favour of the EU. We've seen it throughout all of the culture wars. Any kind of issue that comes up, they have a woke narrative that they want to almost shove down our throats and say this is the appropriate way to think, the appropriate way to talk, and be gone with the rest of you. Unfortunately, the rest of the country doesn't really subscribe to the BBC's mentality. It is a groupthink mentality, and we need to break it down and say, you need to reconnect with normal people up and down the country and represent normal people's views, not just your own political agenda.
On that point, Calvin, thank you. Always good to talk. Calvin Robinson, Conservative commentator, regular with us here on Talk Radio. I know the BBC has a kind of an impossible role in this respect. Where they can please one group of people, they will upset another group. And of course, the classic example really is Brexit, where if you were just even a moderate Brexiteer, you would look at the BBC and weep at what you felt was a very biased output, where these were clearly interviews, the kind of faces that would appear on Question Time or not appear on Question Time, the responses that you felt journalists employed when they were interviewing certain people. And it was quite clear to you as a Brexit supporter that the BBC were all about Remain. And it was in their DNA to not just covertly, but overtly make this point in some of their broadcasting. It was so blatant and explicit in the way they waved the flag for the EU and not Britain that it was tantamount to a crime, certainly a crime of impartiality. Unless, of course, you speak to a Remainer who will tell you the very opposite happened during that. They will explain to you, and the one that always comes to mind is Alistair Campbell, who will explain to you that it was the British Brexit Company that was at work here. Never before have we seen such a display of partisan anti-EU journalistic sentiment weeping out of every door and corridor at Broadcasting House. From the panels to the presenters, it was quite clear this is an organisation that hates the EU and is supporting the leaving of the EU. And that's what Campbell will say every day of the week. So in that respect, the BBC's answer is, well, we've got it about right. But of course, they haven't got it about right, because the BBC have got so much wrong. And one of the things, I can get into all the internals of the BBC. I used to work at the BBC. I did about 18 months at the BBC. You don't get that for some crimes, by the way, do you? 18 months at the BBC. And internally, which I think the internal problems naturally end up converting to external and visual problems, are absolutely plentiful. It is a crime scene over there at the BBC when you look at how it's run, how it's put together, the system, the pecking order of who makes decisions at what point, with whom, what you have to do. There's all of that, and that does have an effect on being creative and doing what they're meant to do, by the way, which is to make world-beating quality programmes for telly and radio. So the internals absolutely have an effect on the externals. So that's not a kind of parochial argument. It's absolutely relevant. However, when it comes to what comes out your telly box on a nightly basis, I mean, there is so much missing from what the BBC think they should be doing. And they have a whole area where diversity is clearly huge to them. Now, I get that. I understand that it's a bit weird in the 21st century that everybody would be pasty white and male on the TV. And they've changed that in a way that I don't think anybody could argue with. But when it comes to diversity of thought, that's a whole different thing. So when it comes to questioning who is not on the Question Time panel, don't fascinate yourself as to whether it's a Remainer or a Brexiter. Fascinate yourself on the other stuff, all the other areas of life that only we on talkRADIO talk about. Nowhere else will talk about it. We'll give you that platform. That's why this is the fastest growing radio station on the flipping planet right now, for that very reason. And if you had a little bit more of that at the BBC, we might be sitting here saying, yeah, good old BBC, it's British, it's our broadcaster, we'll pay the 158 quid or whatever it is, because we don't mind that, because it's doing what we want it to do. But when you look at it and it's not representing anything apart from a very small kind of metropolitan elite, and that is compounded by seeing Charlie and Nagger on a sofa giggling at the Queen. Wasn't it funny, a picture of the little Queen there? You got your Queen picture up, Robert Jenrick, you got your Union flag, bless you. When you get that, you think, hang on a second, that might well play well in Notting Hill at the dinner party. I'm sure the Islington Massive are very impressed by that. But get out of your London suburbs and get around the country. And I think people quite like the Union flag and the Queen for that matter.